Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into another episode of Garden of Doom, and this week we are being visited again by our friend Professor Michael York. He's coming to us from England, not from England, from Europe. You're in the Netherlands, right?
I'm in France right now.
In France right now. Okay, this is great. This adds on to the people in different countries that I do at the end of the year, where as if that really makes a difference. But so Professor York was on before. He's also part of the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, and we'll talk about that at the end. We've promised each other to not let us forget about plugging that conference. And he's obviously a subject matter expert speaker, where I'm just, I don't know, I'm just a guy. He's been on before, and we talked about comparative mythology, which is like his expertise. And if you missed that show, you should go back and check it out. And accidentally, there was a great synergy when his show aired, because I think the week after, I can't even remember who the guest was. I think it might have been Reverend Willis. And we also talked about, it was like almost like a perfect continuation. One show like led into the other, but I promised the audience I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of worked out. Anyway, I gave Professor York a question. I presented them with a question as a possible topic, and this was how I framed it. And because a lot of it started with probably a different misconception of mine, which maybe we'll get into, maybe we won't, depending on how time was, which that a lot of cultures, when they get conquered by another civilization, the next civilization sort of takes the indigenous gods and they just put their new names on it, sort of like Jupiter took over for Zeus. And Professor York said, well, that's not exactly right. I mean, they were the same god. So I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. We may talk about that too. So then my next follow-up question sort of was like, but it was almost based on this misconception, was like, do you know if there's any attributes of gods in sort of any of the major pantheons that are out there? And there's so many, it's sort of, so by major pantheon, I guess I mean what we call the Middle East now, and, the European pantheons. I'm not disrespecting the 33 million gods in the Indian pantheon, or other, America's, shamanistic, animistic pantheons and Chinese and Japanese, but I'm thinking about the ones where I came from, where you grew up learning, Norse, Greek, Egyptian to a lesser extent, etc. And then you get into sort of the old Canaanites, which includes the, who became the Israelites, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, Celtics, things that Americans probably heard of, or European Americans probably heard of, and then made their way into pop culture through Dungeons and Dragons and Thor comic books and whatever. So I was asking, do the angels and demons of biblical canon, whether Old Testament, New Testament, fan fiction, supplemental canons, do they share the same attributes with certain gods? In other words, this is just an example which may be completely based on nothing. Did Hermes and Osiris and Apollo or whatever turn into Uriel, the messenger, or, was Ares, the angel of death, or, just stuff like that. And he's like, well, I don't know. I gotta think about that a little bit. And so this was like a rare occasion where I sort of got to give a professor, an assignment, and he accepted. Though I think that he probably didn't really need to do much except, dial down on his already, the computer knowledge banks in his head. So anyway, that was a rather long introduction as to what the show is, but I wanted to frame it. Professor, thank you so much for coming back on Garden of Doom.
You're welcome. You're more than welcome. And I'm not quite sure where to start with this, but all right, let's start with Zeus and Jupiter. Ennius was the Roman poet, I guess, who made the identifications that we inherited in classical mythology. So, and the really correct ones would be that Jupiter, he identified as the Greek Zeus. They both derive from the same original source, basically personification of light, associated with lightning, also with rain. And so this particular deity is he's the weather god. He's what brings fertility to the lands and so forth. His name among the Norse would be Tyr, or Germanic Tiwaz. That's reconstruction of Tiwaz. And we see in the Norse mythology, at least on that basis, that Tyr would have been the Zeus or Jupiter, the leading figure of the respective pantheons, deriving from the Indo-European source. That he was ultimately replaced by Odin or Woden. And that's a whole other complicated story. I don't know if that fits into our topic, but to a degree it does, because there's a whole school of thought that sees Woden as the figure of the conquering aristocracy that came from the south to Scandinavia. And to legitimize their own position, they pushed Woden to the primary position. Tyr becomes kind of demoted, and he's a god of honor and truth, and he's the one that sacrifices his hand in when they have to tie up Fenrir, the wolf. But what we have with that particular myth, if we look at that heroic god, if it's Jupiter or Zeus, he fights Typhon. And at some point, he is actually conquered by Typhon until his missing parts are restored by some of the other gods helping him. And then he's able to then finally conquer Typhon, the enemy god. You find it the same figure, the Hittite weather god. He gets his, I think it's his eyes that are stolen from the enemy god. And he ends up, he marries that's a strange one. He marries a woman from a poor man, gives birth to a son, then uses the son. The son then marries the daughter of the enemy god, and he asks for as a dowry the missing parts of the weather god. Once the weather god then has his missing parts, he can then He then conquers the enemy god, has to sacrifice his own son because the son now is allied to his father-in-law. So then you also have in India, among the Vedic peoples, the heroic god is Indra, the god of thunder, lightning, and so forth. He's the son of Dias, who's also cognate with Zeus, Jupiter, Tyr. And there's a point when he is fighting Vritra, the dragon, that he withdraws in fear. And so again, there's that whole thing where the heroic god is subdued by the enemy figure. Indra then finally regains his courage and goes forth and subdue and conquer the Vritra, the dragon god. And the dragon god has withheld all the waters. So everything is dried and parched. And by Indra being the thunder rain god, conquering Vritra, the waters are released. And so you have the monsoon, and then the earth is fertile again, and agriculture can flourish. So that's the story with now. That's the story with Jupiter. I mean, he really is not. He wasn't replaced by, or Zeus wasn't replaced by Jupiter. They were actually identified. Some of the other figures in Ennius, Vesta, the Greek god of the hearth, Greek goddess of the hearth, is an obvious parallel to Hestia, the Greek goddess of the hearth. There's a couple of other ones in there, but Apollo, I think, was basically imported by the Romans from the Greeks. The one figure that Ennius had difficulty with was Janus, the two-headed god of the Romans. There isn't a Greek equivalent of Janus, so it becomes an additional figure of the Roman pantheon. But so anyhow, it was Ennius who basically made the identities between Greek gods and Roman gods that we've inherited as the classic understanding of the Greco-Roman religion, mythology, and so forth. The Romans had, as we've already mentioned, they had this whole policy called the Interpretatio Romana. So when they conquered people, they identified their indigenous figures with a figure in the Roman pantheon. Apollo, Mars, Ceres, and especially, of course, Jupiter. They all have equivalents throughout the Celtic pantheon and maybe some of the other pantheons of the Greeks. But that was a whole process. It was a political maneuver, but it also helped facilitate the viability and durability of the Roman Empire. It still remains the longest lasting empire that the world knows, and it basically, Pax Romana was the establishment of a huge area of peace throughout the world that has not been actually reduplicated. So Romans were very clever, and they used religion as their means of promulgating their government and rulership over these people and incorporating them into their empire. All right, then comes along the church, and the church, of course, wants to overthrow the pagan religions, and in doing so, that it gets very complicated. The church basically was very clever too in its own way. They would build a church over a pagan site, usually over a pagan temple, and sometimes they incorporated that pagan deity into usually it was a saint, not an angel. You don't really have churches. I don't think you have churches dedicated to angels, but you do have churches dedicated to saints. And so that was a common practice. I think the three clearest ones would be St. Bridget in Ireland, who really is a fusion with Brie, the daughter of the Dagda, So she survives as a saint. The goddess survives as a saint. Dionysus becomes Saint Denis. He's connected with Montmartre in Paris. And there's the Church of Saint Pierre de Montmartre, which is actually built on a temple, probably of Mars. That's how we get the name Montmartre, the Mount of the Martyrs.
Michael, are you on yet?
Yes, Richard.
Maybe he just.
And
live radio.
We have a worker here doing something, and I guess he wants to leave. But are we still on being recorded, or did you? The Mount of the Martyrs. That's Montmartre in Paris, and the Church of I don't know why it's called Saint Pierre de Montmartre, but anyhow, in that church, it's right next to the Sacré Coeur. It was the original church of that area, and in it, what's really fascinating about that church is you have 4 of the pillars that were used in the temple that preceded the church are still in the church. They're in the 4 corners of the church. But the church is actually associated with Saint Denis, and it is the spot where, when Saint Denis was being led to his execution, one of the soldiers got impatient and cut off his head, and that was the site where this occurred. So Saint Denis picks up his head and continues on to the place where he was supposed to be martyred, and there is now a church dedicated to him there. But it's an obvious reconstruction of the myth of Dionysus, who was dismembered by the Titans, and then ultimately is brought back to life. He's reassembled.
Only to have was it Hera? Was it Hera that threw him off the mountain so that he always had a limp, or was it Zeus who threw him off the mountain?
No, that's Hephaestus.
Oh, right. Not Dionysus. Sorry.
Yeah. That's a whole other story. But
right, those Greeks with their family feuds.
Yes, they really had them. The interesting thing about the Saint Denis legend and Montmartre is just about a block away from that church, you have a vineyard that still exists right in Paris itself, Dionysus being the lord of the vineyard, the lord of wine. And so it's all there. That's what the most fascinating thing about paganism in Europe is that so much of it is it's just there under the surface
right.
of the ultimate subsequent Christian developments and so forth.
Well, Osiris also got dismembered, and then Isis flew all over the place to find the pieces of him and reassemble. She went to the underworld, and then there was Horus who defeated Set, also lost his eye, like Odin and the other gods. Yeah.
Yeah. So the gods are vulnerable. They can even know death as Dionysus did, and as Persephone does, and so forth. That does exist, but they more often, rather than knowing death per se, they can be injured and lose parts. Now, the thing with Tyr among the Norse is that by losing his hand, there's an old Indo-European tradition, whereas the ruler has to be integral. It can't be deformed or missing some essential feature. So you have, among the Celts, you have Nuada, who's really the same figure once again. He loses his arm in the battle with the Fomorians, or I think it is, and they get to rule for a period of time. Finally, either Nuada's arm is replaced by an arm of silver, or his own arm is restored by one of the healing gods in the Celtic tradition. He's then able to defeat the Fomorians and then become the ruler once again. So you have this thing where the hero god is temporarily defeated and eventually restored. Now, among the Norse, that doesn't happen. It's almost like the myth has been interrupted. And instead of Tyr regaining his throne, Odin still remains on it. And Odin seems to be, there's this school of thought that feels that Odin paved the way for Christianity to ultimately take over the original Scandinavian pantheon led by Tyr and Thor. Thor is another version of the same figure, more specifically connected with thunder itself and lightning.
Sure. Thor, my hammer, my necklace. Everyone's favorite is Thor. You, at some point way back when, and you're talking about it now again, said that the aristocracy from the south conquered Scandinavia. What religion were they? I mean, obviously they weren't Christians yet. Were they what we would call Celtic? Were they sort of what people traditionally think of like old British and old Irish?
They were Teutonic, but Teutonic actually is a Germanic tribe.
Sure.
And not really Celtic. Who are their other figures? Well, we know that Wotan is a Germanic figure. Thor was Donar. You have basically the same figures, but Wotan seems to be a later figure. That's Hilda Davidson's argument, that he's a much later figure, and she actually referred to him as a demon who usurps the throne of the gods. And I kind of subscribe to that theory because it fits in with the other Zeus and demon type patterns you find with the other cultures. And when this conquering aristocracy came from basically from Germania up north, they really pushed their own Woden god to put themselves in the ascendancy. And the other figures who had been very popular, they retained them, but they were not in quite the same preeminent position that they had been. Interesting, in Scandinavia, I don't know if you have place names that relate to Odin. You do have several place names to Thor, to Freyr, and so forth. But Woden seems on that basis to be a later figure.
Right. I mean, I know they named gates after it, like much later in modern times when they're, building cities in Norway and stuff.
Oh, right. But so anyhow,
that's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about like 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago.
I think kind of. All right. So now we have the church. The church kind of moves into Scandinavia on the heels of the Woden domination of Scandinavia. In Rome, of course, they were much further advanced, and so what they did with the pagan gods that existed, most of them were basically ascribed to being demons. And so as demons, if they are assimilated at all to angels, it would be to the fallen angels rather than the non-fallen.
Still counts.
Still counts. All right. If that counts, then fine. All right. You have Baal is probably the main one that becomes Beelzebub. But
I really want to spend some time on Baal, because Baal, I think, gets a really bad rap early on. I mean, way back when, Baal was just like a god of fertility and your weather god and sort of your god of war for Canaanites and Babylonians and Akkadians, basically everyone that wasn't the Judeans, and probably even the Judeans. But at some point when the god of Israel sort of took over, Baal sort of became demonized. And there's like a demon called Moloch who eats babies that sort of looks like a devil or a goat. And like at some point somewhere, like Baal and Moloch were conflated in appearance. And Baal, I think now has been popularized as Belial, the angel who has fallen, who then became Beelzebub, one of the 7 princes of hell, the Lord of Flies. And in the beginning, if I understand my origins correctly, the Lord of the Flies thing was actually because when Baal came, or Baal, the flies would scatter. In other words, he was a cure, like plague couldn't touch him. He was prosperity. The flies would eat on dissecting bodies, diseased bodies, and when Baal came, they went. The flies went. That's why it was the Lord of the Flies. It's not like he was like Ant-Man and had a horde of flies that he could, draw to. So, like, I talk to people and they say, that's who we're fighting. We're fighting Baal. We're fighting Baal. And, like, it's like they've taken a whole bunch of things and basically taken, like, the Old Testament of this land belongs to the Israelites, so that God is bad, this God is good, and have turned it into some sort of, like, I don't know, like, revelations. Like, they've taken, like, Judaic or apocalyptic Judaism and turned it into, like, Christian apocalyptic revelations, and it's just a whole weird thing. So, forgive my digression and my interjection.
No.
But
I mean, the important thing to realize is that Baal actually means Lord, and it was a name that was applied to several different deities. And basically, Baal is really probably Marduk, who was again your champion god who overthrows the demon and sets up the proper order, the divine order. Right. But the Jewish people, the Hebrews, had a hard time separating themselves. I mean, they're constantly being put down by the prophets in the Old Testament because they kept worshiping Asherah and Baal and these Canaanite figures. In the Baal myth, you already have an opposition to some extent between Baal and El. And El is one of the figures that becomes the Jewish Elohim. Elohim is a pluralization of El. So right. it probably includes Mot, the god of death, who is another enemy of Baal, and Yam, the prince of the sea, and they are all considered sons of El. Yahweh is a little bit more confusing. He comes in there, but we don't know really where he comes from. But at some point, he is identified with El or the Elohim, or becomes one of them. It becomes the dominant figure. And so it's interesting, even in the use of the word Elohim for Yahweh or for God in the Old Testament, it's a pluralization. Right. It's not a single figure, although with the rise of monotheism, it becomes
right. And I think and I think that if people just look at the names of the angels that they know best, aside from Lucifer, who also came later. I mean, you have Uriel, you have Michael, you have Raphael, Samael, Azazel, Belial. It seems like the El is almost like, the man of, it's like I belong to, like, El is my I'm the bondsman of El. El's the leader, El's the one. And I'm like, it's like Arthur and we are, Knights of the Round Table. It's almost like saying Gawain of Camelot, That's my interpretation anyway.
And I find it very annoying that my name, Michael, means he who is like El. And I mean, as a pagan, I'm opposed to that figure, El. He does conquer Baal at some point, but Baal's sister Anat assists Baal, and so he then comes back. He never really conquers El, but he is reestablished. So there's this tension, even in Canaanite myth, already between Baal and El, which I think ultimately the Hebrews capitalize on and fuse it with their Yahweh figure. And so Baal becomes probably the leading demon. He's the prince of demons. As you mentioned, Lucifer, who is the light bearer. That's what his name means. And So it's another name in a sense for Zeus and Jupiter and all those figures. He was identified with Venus, and he becomes the fallen angel. So again, you have probably a deity type figure, or a deity itself, that's been transformed into a demon in the Jewish and Christian traditions, and I guess probably Islam as well.
I'm figuring that's like a favorite son type. That's your Apollo, Osiris, maybe even Thor type. I'm not really sure, but I mean, it seems like Lucifer was the favorite son who I don't know, disappointed his father or rebelled, as teenagers do.
He rebelled against the father and then was punished for that. And it's an interesting thing. Then you have Christianity with Christ as the son of the father. And it's kind of like he almost then predominates over the original Yahweh figure to an extent. And then you have Islam, which then is the father reasserting himself over the son. So Jesus becomes recognized as a prophet among the Muslims, but he's not God. And so he's been then demoted, and the original father figure has now been restored in that Abrahamic tradition. It's like, except that it battles with the Jewish tradition. It's like a re-establishment of that kind of monotheistic idea. In Christianity, you have a monotheism of three different figures, so that comprises three different figures. So it's already
not mono.
It's actually more polytheistic than Wicca with its god and goddess. You have three figures rather than the two. It's a bizarre kind of. That's why religion is so fascinating, because it has all these distortions, confluences, and reestablishments, and so forth. There's no limit to what degree it will all go to.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, of course you are. But when I started this show, first of all, when I started doing it as a solo show as opposed to the original iteration with my partner, former partner, I never thought I'd be spending this much time on religion and theosophy. And it's just because there is there's so much interesting stuff in there. It's more interesting than a werewolf story. I mean, I figured I'd be doing more werewolf stuff and vampire stuff and whatever, but everything is in, theology. And then when you get into the mythologies, and then you start realizing there's so many parallels. And of course it makes sense because it came from the Indo-European tradition. And of course the Indo-Europeans didn't just, get teleported here from Andromeda Prime or whatever, Andromeda's a different galaxy. I guess it'd be Centauri Prime or Proxima Centauri. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They came from somewhere else and then took some of the traditions with them as well, or brought some of the traditions with them. It sort of makes sense. The origin of that is still fascinating. Is it God? Is it gods? Were they aliens? that I love. That's completely unanswerable until the mothership comes down or doesn't, or until Revelations. But that's also endlessly fascinating. But the audience, I'm rambling now because I really thought I'd be spending more time on like Marvel movies and, Frankenstein and sea monsters and whatever. And I am. It's Leviathan. It's the Golem. It's Osiris being reconstructed, from death. I mean, it's all there. I mean, everything is already in mythology.
It is all there. That is true. And, the angels themselves are fascinating. You have your four main ones would be Michael, who's the one that battles Satan. You go to a lot of old pagan sites in Europe, and there'll be a church dedicated to Saint Michael on that site. like in Karnak and places like that. Uriel, who's the master of knowledge and wisdom, he becomes the angel of repentance. Raphael is the one who announces the day of judgment, and Gabriel announces God's will to humans. And in a sense, those four are supposedly represent the cardinal points. And so again, you have this kind of earth pagan telluric orientation, but is transmuted into a Christian fabric. And these things then become reinterpreted or restructured in a way that then fits the new ideology, theology, whatever you want to call it. Of the basic angels, I mean, they all have that. They all end in with the name El, meaning God itself, with two exceptions. Metatron, whoever he really is, he's considered to be Enoch after Enoch was transformed into an angel. And then you have another one, Sandalphon. I'm not really sure what he is an angel of, but he's not even mentioned in the scriptures. But all the rest of them have the name El as an appendix to whoever they are or identified as.
Which is interesting because apotheosis, predates the Bible too. Hercules, had that. It's not exactly unusual either. But do you know Professor Robert Temple?
No, I don't. I know his name, but I don't know him.
Okay. I mean, listen, not all professors know each other, and not all professors that are in Europe know each other. But he's been on the show, and he's the one who introduced me to the fourth state of matter, which is plasma, but not plasma like blood fluid, like plasma, like basically dark matter. And he said that there's two clouds of plasma, like equidistant from Earth, between Earth and Moon, in almost like a triangulated position. And apparently this is true. Now, the next part, I don't know if it's true or not, but dark matter, but the fourth state of matter is real. I looked it up. Yes, I grew up liquid, solid, gas. I mean, I know anything about a fourth state of matter. And George Mitrovic has introduced me to a fifth. That doesn't yet make the Google list, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 or 10 years it does. Because all these guys tend to be right ahead of, the rest of the world catching up to them. Anyway, he said that one of those is Metatron, and that they have consciousness. And then the other one might be, what was the name you said? Soliditron? And I mean, they all sound terribly like, the Transformers villains, like Megatron and Starscream and Optimus Prime and all that. But, again, those names didn't come from nowhere either. But yeah, Metatron is of, it's interesting because, depending on who you listen to, it was Enoch, but then he became the leader of the archangels, and I don't know if any of that's true. It seems like he might have replaced Lucifer as God's favorite, like his right-hand man.
It could be. I mean, there's so many different versions of the angels and who is what and who they are. So I mean, that's fluid as well. Some are mentioned in the Old Testament, not in the New. Some are mentioned in both. Some aren't mentioned at all in Scripture. So it's again a very fluid area. I mean, going back to dark matter and dark energy, we don't really know quite yet what those are. Presumably, more of the universe consists of dark matter and dark energy. Our matter energy part is a smaller proportion or percentage of the cosmos as a whole. So that's another great mystery that we have yet to decipher. But to go back to apotheosis, the Chinese are really big on that. Most of their popular figures were actually human beings like Tin Hao and so forth, who become apotheosized upon death. You have the same in the Yoruba and other Afro-Latin traditions. Their figures were originally human beings who become deified upon death and become the leading Orishas or so forth.
Right.
So you have that throughout much of even Helen and Achilles are supposedly hypothesized in Greek mythology and become a couple living on, some island, Luque? I'm not quite sure which island that is, but it's there somewhere.
So Paris took Helen from, was it Linnaeus?
Menelaus.
Okay, yeah. But after all of that, she ends up with Achilles.
Yeah, after all that she does, unless you read Kazantzakis' continuation of the Odyssey, which is a fascinating read.
Well, Achilles was a demigod to begin with, so he was. Well, so was Hercules. So I mean,
all right, but he was. All the heroes were, but he was mortal. That was the one thing that when his mother held him make him immortal, she held him by his heel or ankle, and that was his one vulnerable part, which Paris got the spear into. But Helen ends up being reunited with Menelaus after the Trojan War. And in Kazantzakis' version, she looks up at I think it's the moon, either it's the moon or the planet Venus, but I think it's the moon, at the same time that Odysseus, now back with his wife in Ithaca, looks up at the moon. And Odysseus is just, he's had this whole life of adventure and he can't stand it. And he decides that he's going to find Helen, and he does get her. They both get to Crete. It's really exciting how all that plays out. And she ends up marrying a gardener in Crete and has lots of children and lives happily into old age. And he ends up Odysseus on an iceberg. Takes him to the South Pole as he dies. But,
it's like Victor von Frankenstein.
Yeah, but anyway, so that version, she doesn't have immortality, but in others she does. So the apotheosis is something that you do find. Well, and again, I suppose even with the Celtic deities, they go into the She. They did live on the earth, but then they live in the other world, and in the She itself, these don't.
Yeah, they go back and forth.
Yeah.
And then the Norse had something. I mean, the 9 realms, and they sort of had the dark elves that sort of seem to. I don't know. There's all sorts of layers of weird in all the mythologies. I mean, they have all these characters. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Layer of weird is a good way to put it.
Yeah, makes British science fiction seem rather tame.
In a way, I agree with you on that. Because when you look at even Tolkien, as fascinating as his things are, they're kind of a modern creation that I don't think really compares to the actual mythologies that we had among the ancients, especially among the Greeks. The Greeks had such a rich imagination and many, many different versions of the same story. So it's an endless labyrinth to wander into. But
well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Tolkien's is a much more linear story, and that's partly a modern device. It's partly because it's one guy who wrote the books versus probably dozens, if not hundreds, of people who wrote these stories over 1,500 years probably. So and then others that told them that became written and retold, and the next village over had their a slightly different version. Yeah. So the other demons, demons are fun, unless you're possessed by one, I suppose. So which other demons do you think lend themselves to these kinds of comparisons semi-easily? Because I'm learning that none of it's easy.
That's hard to answer, but I suppose the most obvious would be Pan, because he was horned. He's very often identified as Satan himself. And then we have the whole thing that Pan is dead. But I think with our pagan revaluation of the earth and our ecological efforts and concerns, I think that Pan will come back to life. That's my hope, at least, and I'm a militant optimist. So that Pan will return like Persephone. She only comes back periodically, but she comes back for the growing season, and she's an interesting figure because she seems to be happily married to Hades, and she is the welcoming goddess to the underworld, as well as the goddess of fertility, along with her mother in this world. Who else is there? It's hard to say. I mean, we have to recognize that our word demon comes from the Greek daemon.
Right.
And the daemons were really basically spirits that existed between humans and gods. They were not negative figures. They were providers. I think daemon means provider, and they were the ones that bestowed good fortune, wealth, prosperity, and so forth to humans. So they were like intermediaries of the gods themselves, who were often the ones that actually gave the benefits that the gods were giving us to us ourselves. And then, of course, the church had, they became demons rather than daemons.
Right, but they've got saints and prophets, and in other religions you have oracles. I mean, they're all sort of intermediaries as well.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And I guess the angels were intermediaries too. I mean, aren't all the angels Malachim? They're all messengers.
In some ways, they preside over certain areas, like Uriel with knowledge and wisdom, and Raziel is an interesting one. He's the angel of secrets, the angel of mysteries. He's also known as the keeper of all magic. So, I mean, I don't know how much more pagan you can get than that.
Right. I mean, this is the angels already covered what the Masons and others have said the line of Cain did. Basically all of the evil skills, the forbidden knowledge we weren't supposed to have, was already covered by the angels who were messengers. So, I mean, maybe it wasn't so forbidden after all.
Yeah. All right. All right. So you have Jophiel is one of the angels, and Jophiel is associated with, is a female figure associated with beauty and art. And another figure is Haniel, who's actually associated with the planet Venus, but they seem to be incorporations of Aphrodite or Venus into the angelology of the biblical tradition.
Is that what we call people honey?
Yes.
Really?
Well, I don't know about that. But Haniel she's the angel of grace, favor, and charm, which are really attributes of Aphrodite, of Venus. Aphrodite is another complex figure. She's really an import from the Levant, along with Hephaestus. And she really replaces the Eos, the goddess of the dawn. So she's not really an original Indo-European Greek figure.
Right. So she's like Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, that line?
Yeah, closer to that tradition.
Because her origin story, even in Greek mythology, is weird. I mean, she predates the Olympians. Well, I guess when the Olympians were inside of Kronos, and Zeus castrated Kronos. I may have the generations wrong because there's so many.
He castrated Uranus.
Okay, so
when the genitals fall into the sea, the foam then becomes Aphrodite.
Right, so it's Kronos who castrates Uranus, right? And so Aphrodite is actually a generation before the Olympians.
Right, but that's Hesiod. That's not Homer. Homer has Aphrodite as the daughter of Dione, who's the feminization of, again, Zeus himself. And it's called he imported the Levantine succession myth. And so he's the one that has, Uranus, then Cronus, then Zeus. He makes it into a generational thing. And that's a later incorporation, or it's a born incorporation that Hesiod employs in his theogony.
Well, he's copying like pretty much every other religion where there's sort of like your primordial father, then there's the next father, then there's it's like the grandson who becomes the king of the gods, usually, often.
In a way, but I think that's more, usually it's, you have your chief god who gets demoted but then gets restored to his position. It doesn't get transformed into a succession myth. That's Levantine, that's Akkadian.
Uh-huh.
And it's something that we inherit from a separate tradition than the Indo-European.
Okay. Yeah, I have to brush up on my Craigenford, that YouTube with John L. White. Just go
into it.
Yeah, no, he's very good at that. But I mean, but everyone has their own version. Like you said, it's not Homer, it's Hesiod, and I just assume one is accepted. But why would I have assumed that? I mean, that's silly.
Well, I mean, Hesiod and Homer are the main ones, but you have Pindar, you have so many others that all get in on the act, one way or the other. So,
and then all the playwrights,
Asclepius, Euripides, Sophocles. I guess they all have important figures to play, and Aristophanes even.
The last angel you were talking about, it sounded like she was a she. And my understanding is that the angels were either all male or androgynous, but I think they're all male. I think the androgyny came later, but I'm not sure. But was she a feminine, or was it just a male who had traditionally feminine qualities? I'm afraid in 2023 to say the sentence, but I already did.
In researching her, the pronoun used for that particular figure is she.
So there's a she angel. There's a girl angel.
Yeah. So both of them. I think both of them are Jophiel and who was the other one? Haniel. I think are she angels. I mean, Michael can't be a she. Gabrielle can't be. Whether they're hermaphroditic or supposedly they're sexless, but then again.
But they had sex. they had sex right there, like on page 2 of Genesis, and again in the Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, I don't know how angels allow themselves to be violated by men, but okay. I mean, I can't imagine the men overpowered them, so they must have been voluntary participants.
They must have been voluntary. Yeah, it's true. But but your watcher angels. I mean, they lusted over the daughters of men, so. They were sexual creatures, and you can't think of Satan or Lucifer as a androgynous figure, whatever else he may be.
Right. So, when did Lucifer become Satan, or when did Satan become Lucifer? Because I mean, Satan, was a loyal, like prosecutor of God, and even in some of the other, I'm not even sure it's canon, but the support, like Satan's one of the 7 princes of hell. I mean, 7, not the head of the council, and if there's princes, I assume they answer to a king or a queen, or at least they have some sort of a, co-equal shared power. I mean, at what point, what source is it that Satan took the lead and that Lucifer and Satan, morphed into one?
It seems to be through Christianity. I suppose it's in the New Testament. I'm not quite sure how that's done. There's a reference, I think, in the Old Testament of Venus being the fallen star. And that is ultimately then used to develop the Lucifer legend and the light bearer then falling, as Venus does when she's in the evening, as the evening. Is it the evening star or the morning star?
It's the morning star, because last week I made the mistake of talking to my guest, Rabbi Joe Kolakowski, and he couldn't remember if the morning star was Venus and Mercury, and I, with such authority, said it's Mercury, but it's actually Venus.
No, it's Venus.
Yeah.
It's Venus. And the evening star and the morning star are both Venus at the different times when she appeared. So I think the satanic development was really something that the church did with the development of the whole idea of the demons being the former gods of the pagans. And the Satan development comes at that point. The Jews don't really have Satan in the sense that we have it. If anything, it could be influenced by the Zoroastrians under the captivity in Babylon, because you have the dichotomy between Ahura Mazda as the good god and Ahriman as the equally powerful force of evil. And so it's a real dualistic system. But the post-exilic Jews seem to have then incorporated that kind of figure of Satan from that point on. But it's the church that really, I think, then ultimately really develops it. I don't know if contemporary Judaism really has that much to say about Satan.
No, I mean, according to the guests that I've spoken to, no, but I mean, but a bunch of them are rabbis and Orthodox rabbis, and others are not rabbis, but yeshiva schooled Orthodox. So I figure that they know what they're talking about on that fairly major point. Like, I'm not asking them what mana is, it's I mean, it sounds like meals ready to eat that the military drop, but, I don't know. All right. So Satan's sort of a mystery as to when Satan and Lucifer morphed into one, but, so somewhere, some Pope, Gregory the 14th or whatever, said so at some point.
Yes.
All right. That's enough on them, I suppose. Oh my God, I had a question and I've lost my thought. I'm having a senior moment, which is
welcome to the club.
I know it's so sad, but I can't even remember what I want to think about. This is awful. All right. Are there any other sort of figures that lend themselves to this conversation?
There must be, but they're not coming to mind.
I remember we spoke initially, and by speaking, I mean, on the emails or text, you mentioned someone named the Morrigan, and I think that's Irish. Who is the Morrigan?
Yeah, the Morrigan, I'm not sure if she is equated with Bond, who becomes the wife of the doctor. She's, what's the other name? Magda. I think that's, she's the Celtic figure. She is pregnant and she has to have and they force her into a race. She wins the race and dies at the finish line, giving birth to, I think it's Luke, is whom she gives birth to. So she's one of the Celtic mother goddess figures, but more militant, or more in a more military emphasis than some of the other Tuatha-De-Danann goddesses, who are more strictly fertility.
More Athena than Aphrodite?
Yes, exactly.
Were any of the fallen angels or demons, were they she-angels? I mean, I imagine that the she-angels didn't take the daughters of Adam and procreate with them, but were any of the demons, maybe they didn't engage in the procreation, but they still thought it was a pretty cool idea to go down to Earth? Were any of them women, or is it not said, not addressed?
It's not addressed. I mean, it was that group of watcher angels, and then they were then condemned as such, and the rest of the angels, I think, didn't want to go there, because it became a real divide between the angels of heaven and the fallen angels of either earth or hell. And I don't know of other angels doing that. But, of course, the whole witch cult in the Middle Ages, whether any of that existed, they were supposedly having sex with Lucifer as again, the chief fallen angel. And whether that was something that was created more by the church and then forced onto these persecuted women, and their alleged celebration of the Black Mass and so forth, that's an open question.
Well, as much as I'd like to think that Lucifer is real and not necessarily the king of evil, but, sort of a fallen angel, I don't know that he came up and started having sex with a bunch of European witches. So, I'm going to go with they're probably having sex with some other handsome dude.
All right, let's go with that.
Yeah, I mean, and with full understanding, it doesn't matter what I say. I mean, it's not going to change a thing, and probably not change your mind out there. I just, I mean, a lot of the monsters go through lots of cycles, and of course, in this cycle of I'll just call Hollywood, a lot of the monsters become sort of resexified. I mean, vampires are now, charming, rich aristocrats. They're handsome and maybe misunderstood. Lucifer is a, handsome guy that's misunderstood. We're sort of going through that cycle. It's like pop counterculture almost. It's like,
yes.
It's our own right way of, I mean, we are rewriting myths. We just don't know it. And just because, we do it, 20,000 times more or at least louder with more, between TV, movies, internet, YouTube, whatever things spread, immediately. If in 5,000 years ago, if I came up with a great story, maybe it would be carried 100 miles, or so. Maybe, given a few more decades or centuries, other people would hear some version of it. But now it's like, this podcast, I mean, there's somebody in Romania, there's someone in Suriname, there's someone, in, I don't know, wherever, pick country X, maybe France, listening to it, and hearing this. It's just so easy to do it. We don't even realize that we're, rewriting myths that who knows in 500 or 600 years that there might be people who believe something that came out of like the Fox TV show Lucifer.
Well, I mean, there are probably certain basic core myths that we could go back to as early as we can trace them. And then we see how they develop and they get transformed, modified, maybe even inverted by different cultures and different periods of time and so forth. But I think that one myth of the heroic chief god being overthrown by this anti-force and then regaining the position. That's a basic one. Right. In the Nordic version, of course, it's been halted. It hasn't been completed. But in the others, it has some sort of a thing. But we in the West have inherited through the Germanic dominance that incomplete myth.
Right.
So we're still in this Judeo-Christian hegemony, whatever else you want to call it. And I think contemporary paganism is a reawakening to our more humanistic, naturalistic undercurrent or religious understandings, and recognizing how much we have been colonized by a imperial ideology under the name of Christianity.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the Romans, like you said, they were the greatest empire, but in some ways it hasn't ended because they figured out another way to, purposefully or otherwise, to maintain empire. And I have other sociological thoughts on that, which are not for this show. But I mean, it is interesting because, as you pointed out, in almost all of the religious myths that we can trace, some hero defeated some version of some type of reptile amphibian, whether it's a sea monster, a dragon, a serpent, something in that vein, in that family. But even in Norse Ragnarok, there's the Midgard serpent, but it happened, and there were survivors. I mean, while it was the end of the world, it wasn't quite the end of the world, and I think 2 sons of Odin survived, or 2 sons of Thor survived. Baldar came back from the underworld with someone else. I think Hodar,
with his blind brother.
Hodar, right? The one who, yeah,
yes.
and like 2 others, and so like they just went to a smaller council. It's like the end of Game of Thrones. They had the end of the world, and then they formed a smaller council of sort of the same group, but a different council. And now in Christianity, Leviathan was defeated. Leviathan was defeated by Behemoth, who Rabbi Joe last week told me is like maybe a giant bull or rhinoceros or unicorn type thing. I'm picturing the Siberian rhinoceros. Doesn't matter. But we are waiting for a 7-headed red dragon with 7 horns and 10 crowns. So we're waiting for the next serpent, but it's like, the mega hydrant. It's like, Monster X Ghidorah from Godzilla lore. So you're right. It's incomplete. And, that incompleteness, there's the control. I mean, everyone's worried about control and all this. I will make one sociological, semi-political thing. Like 5-10 years ago, even less than that, all of the people who hated governments and the cabal and the establishment, they were all about cryptocurrency. Now, the same, listen, I always thought cryptocurrency was a scam and a con to begin with, Ponzi scheme. But I'm a skeptic, so no, it doesn't matter. But now that those same corners are saying, when there's no paper money and it's all on computers, there is no money. That's how they're going to control you. So it's like it's gone a complete 180 from the same people saying opposite things.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much conspiracy theory. One of the latest ones I've encountered was, Fauci and Bill Gates. They're Nazis, and Fauci, the whole COVID vaccination thing was the Nazis getting the revenge for having been defeated by the West and so forth. And and these are people, I have it in my own family. They argued this, and a lady that, the wife of Jim Lewis, now widow of him, right. Another sociologist, she argues all that same thing. And they're intelligent people. I respect them. I don't necessarily subscribe to the conspiracy that they fervently believe, but
yeah,
there it is.
I know a lot of people work in the government, and none of them are deep state, or they're really good at hiding it, and most of them just sort of want to get home at the end of the day and do the best they can, but like the rest of us are imperfect. And I think that's the state of the world. I think it's very comforting to think that there's some group of powerful evildoers who are wanting to control everything. But if anyone who has ever been on a homeowners association or a board of directors or any sort of club could attest to, no group of people, no matter how small, can agree on anything of minor importance, let alone, great controls of the world. But then again, if they're sowing that conspiracy, maybe that's how they've designed us to be so that they can control us. I don't know. I love they. I want to become part of they. So Mr. Musk, if you're looking for a space magistrate, you can be my L. I'll be your space magistrate. I just need some super troopers. That's all. We'll take care of it. So yeah, and I recaptured my my thought, but I relost it in my thing. But I have a new one, which is really because it's interesting because the angels who are the keepers of all of these items, which I pointed out, sort of is like the Masonic legend that the line of Cain had them and it's forbidden. It's also sort of like the same as the legend of Atlantis, that they all had this, great technology and they shared it with, valiant few, or the Tartarians or the Hyperboreans. They did it. The Viracocha came with all this knowledge and taught people metallurgy and fishing and methods of hunting and making tools and music. And, it's, everyone's got that, somebody taught us how to do all these things that we came of. And I don't, I guess those can be angels or gods as good as anything else. I mean, but I think it's just more, allegory.
What?
I think it's just more allegory for things.
Allegory. Okay, allegory.
What does Jung call it? Divergence, I think. Did Jung call it? Or was that Joseph Campbell? I don't know. So somebody said divergence.
Yeah. Well, they are allegories. They have to be. And an allegory doesn't mean that it's untrue. It's just it's a way of actually phrasing things that we often can't phrase in more empirical terminologies. It's still trying to express a truth or a reality of some sort, but you're doing it in a more poetic, imaginative, creative, alternate way of communication.
Yeah.
And
when time goes back tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, you sort of need to have a starting point. And, I think all people strove for that starting point and sort of came up with a similar type of story, or maybe one people came up with that type of story 200,000 years ago, before the out of Africa, and that kernel stayed with everyone, wherever they made their way to. I mean, that seems to be, to me, to be more likely, but, the thing, archaeology, things keep getting older, and they keep finding new things. And, as my friend George Mitrovic points out in his books, that there's all, he doesn't say the words, but I mean, if you've ever spoken to him, you can read in George language, in George voice. And there's lots of things where they're not supposed to be from when they're not supposed to be. And that's okay. I mean, that's fun. That's interesting. I don't think we're going to find the holy grail of knowledge, though. I think we're just going to find out that different people were doing things earlier, that people were doing pottery earlier than we thought, and some of them moved and migrated and taught others. Some people, learned how to do flutes before they did drums, and others learned how to do wind instruments and guitars before others, and some of them migrated and they took their minstrel with them. And, and then, not everyone learned everything all around at the same time, but maybe everybody learned the same type of things within, I don't know, a 3,000 year period or whatever.
Possibly. I mean, there was just something just in the news, and I think, what is it? They found a musical instrument that was much, much earlier than they had ever expected that any type of an anthropoid entity would have been able to create. It throws it way back. It was just in the news the other morning, and I don't have the details on that, but they're constantly finding things that make things much older, or that we were much more advanced as a developing species than we had previously thought. So that's fascinating. And whether we came from outer space, that's another open question. I tend to think that we didn't, but who knows?
Right. It's unprovable at this point, one way or another. So, I mean, it's interesting to think about. It's maybe for some people it's more interesting, and for others it's more fun. For some it's blasphemous. But it's interesting. I think 3 or 4 time guest Bruce Fenton has been on the show, and he might be the foremost expert looking at panspermia in a scientific way. And I don't know. It's hard to argue with some of the data points that some people come up with, and and the commonality of so many things from around the world. Anyway, I feel like I'm circling the same drain, just taking different parts of different pieces of the same puzzle and circling around. So I think this is probably a good time for me to remember to promote the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, where professional speakers will speak in a more organized manner, such as Professor Michael York, and not being interrupted by myself, so that he can actually give a presentation in a well thought out manner. Not that this wasn't fun and interesting, because I think it was. I hope the audience feels as such, but doesn't lend itself to a conference. So if you want to buy tickets, first of all, if you are in the UK, especially near the Glasgow area, there are in-person tickets available. But it's also a virtual. So if you are any of the other 8 billion or so people that are not near Glasgow or the UK, you can buy tickets very reasonably priced. https://NAC, those are all capitalized, NACON lowercase, so NACON, .eventbrite, one word, EVENTBRITE.co, not com, .uk. So you can buy tickets and you get to see the whole panel. There are VIP packages, and if you can go there, do so. But if you can't, buy a virtual ticket. And the more people who buy virtual tickets, it's probably too late for me this year, but maybe next year I get to go. So, people, help a brother out. I mean, I would like to go to Scotland. I think that'd be pretty cool. Anyway, so buy tickets to the conference. Hope you enjoy it. Professor York, is there, I mean, I know you've written books. I know you've done things. So, is there anything that you would like to promote?
I would just say it is an interesting conference, and it's quite wide-ranging. You get so many different perspectives. And I found last year's, utterly fascinating in that sense. So, I mean, I would recommend it. And as far as interruptions in a talk, I always welcome that. I want audience feedback, and it helps when you are giving a presentation to get some questions or comments from an audience, so that you know whom you're talking to and maybe where to steer something. So I welcome your contributions and all that, and I hope when I'm giving my talk at the conference that I could be interrupted or ask questions during it.
Okay, folks, well, you heard it. See, right, buy your tickets. You can interrupt them. There you go.
I could push I've done my autobiography. It's not an academic work. It's basically my life story, but it's also how I became a pagan, how I understand paganism by criticisms of the contemporary pagan movement. So it's all part of that. It's called Matter Matters. An end-of-life perspective on paganism.
Excellent.
And it was published by, it's if anyone goes online, you can find it. And it's sold through Barnes & Noble and all the rest of them.
Excellent. Are you a social media guy? Do you want people to follow you, or do you just don't care about that?
Yeah, people could follow me. I'm on Facebook. That's about it. And I guess I don't know even how you promote that. It's under my name.
Yeah,
Michael York.
You just did. Is there any song that you like that you think would lend itself to this show as a proper outro?
Oh, that's a hard one.
It is.
I don't know. The one song that comes to mind is Ella Fitzgerald singing "Love for Sale."
I'm not sure if that works with the angels and demons and pagans. I don't know. But listen,
it might. I think we could make an argument for that. But
if I can't find anything else, Ella Fitzgerald, "Love for Sale." And then listen, sometimes I get lazy and and anyway, at this point they've listened to the important part of the show if they're as far as the outro. So I probably give it too much thought anyway. All right. Well, I thank you very much. You were a sport because I sort of gave you a project and you ran with it and indulged me in the conversation, and I appreciate it. And hopefully I'll find other things to ask you about, and hopefully you'll say yes to those in the future.
Okay, Jeff, I always enjoy conversing with you, and it's a real pleasure on my part.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much. All right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us and listening, and buy Professor Michael York's book. No, it's not Michael York, the actor. Yes, that's a little disappointing, I suppose, but it is what it is. You can pretend he is, if you like. You had a bit part in Austin Powers, right? You in the backdrop of one of the coffee shops now? You don't want to lie about that? All right, fine.
That period in life that I don't remember. So.
There we go. See, we can neither confirm nor deny that he was in the backdrop of several Austin Powers movies. All right. So rate us, review us, refer us to your friends, and most importantly, tune in next week for more Garden of Doom.